Hey everyone, Mondo Gonzales here in studio, and I have today with me Doug Hershey, all the way from Maine, and we're going to be talking about all the stuff that he's been doing behind the scenes, which is really kind of fascinating. A lot of us know what has happened with October 7th, but what we don't know, again, often is we just hear the big headlines. But Doug has been on site over there, and we thought it would be great to have him share some of the stuff that he's been doing. So, Doug, welcome.
Hey, it's great to have you guys, or it's great to be on with you.
Well, Doug, for those in our audience, I know I have the privilege that you were the first one that I ever interviewed after I came to Prophecy Watchers about your book. So, for those that don't know about you and your ministry and even the books that you've written, maybe share with them.
Yeah, I created a photo book series called the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens Visual Series. And so, what I've done is taken my own personal journey of not only just reading prophecy, but documenting it now. We often think of prophecy in terms of things that are around the corner or, helping us to guide our steps ahead. And there are things that are coming to pass right now in a very practical and tangible way, exactly the way that the prophets foretold. And so, through both photography and video in the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series, I've been able to document a lot of these by side comparison photos through the eyes of Ezekiel. Or through the eyes of Zechariah. So, my best-selling photo book that started it was Israel Rising, that has over 100 photo comparisons from 25 locations all over Israel that describes what the land looked like for the past 2,000 years, and but also looking at photos of what the land looked like prior to the establishment of Israel, what it looked like afterwards. The second follow-up book of that was Jerusalem Rising, that was documenting this foretold restoration of Jerusalem from the eyes of Zechariah. And then I completed a online course called 10 Prophecies Fulfilled in Your Lifetime, which quite literally in the videos we read the prophecies, and then I take you on location to where it's happening right now with documented evidence and proof, and a lot of it of which you can see the evidence for yourself. And so I have another photo book coming up that'll be in 2026, but the series is continuing to grow with the intention of helping people realize that there are things that were written in the prophets that are happening right now in our lifetime. And we can not just talk about them, we can document them, and we can actually also get involved with some of the fulfillments of some of the things that are happening right now. And that's some of what I've been doing since the October 7th attack with my organization, Ezra Adventures.
Yeah, to talk a little bit more about Ezra Adventures and at least what you've been doing in the past. Obviously, things have been a little bit challenging there in Israel, but talk about that.
With Ezra Adventures, I originally had started it as a travel company, but now it's sort of enveloped all of my research and books and learning with the intention of, again, talking about not just talking about prophecy, but documenting, but then giving an opportunity to really step into it. And so, one of the things that the prophets talk about when it talks about the restoration of Israel is that Israel is not going to be restored just by Jewish hands, but by Gentile hands. So the prophets talk about that the ships from Tarshish will come from afar bringing silver and gold, and the Gentile nations will be carrying your sons and daughters back on their shoulders, and that foreigners will work your vineyards and work your fields, and strangers will build up your walls. All of these descriptions talking about Gentiles helping to restore the nation of Israel. And so what we've been doing since October 7th, Isaiah 61:5 says that foreigners will be your vine dressers, and strangers will tend your flocks and work the fields. And so since the October 7th attacks, not a lot of people realize outside of Israel perhaps, but less than half of the workforce that Israel had for their agricultural harvest and agricultural workforce, Israel's been still functioning with less than 50% of those numbers prior to October 7th. So what I had been doing since beginning of 2024 is I put the word out just saying, hey, is there anybody not interested in a tour? Are you interested in actually coming to help? I can, in the most literal sense right now, even today, the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. Israel just simply needs willing hands and hearts to come and help. And so I've been organizing 10-day trips where we'll take at least 5 days working in the fields, working with alongside local farmers just to help them with a harvest or get their farms back online after the attacks. And there's still tremendous amount of needs, but um, last year I led 6 different groups. I was just a few weeks, last month was just in some cherry orchards in the Golan Heights, and I have several more planned for the fall. So Israel still very much needs help, and it's a beautiful time to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, even, just I've spent some time in a kibbutz, and it's actually just it's very refreshing. There's something just about it, just being, of course, you're in the land of Israel, which is for most of us is, our second home because we spend so much time in the scripture, with all the sites and the geography, etc. So when you're there, you're like, man, I feel like I'm very used to all the language and the signposts and other things. So it really is a fascinating opportunity just to spend there. Um, before I want to talk a little bit more about that. Before we do, you mentioned the series that you had on, the 10 prophecies fulfilled in your lifetime. How do people find that?
Specifically for the course, you can find it at doughershey.co/the course. And so if you go to doughershey.co, that's my website, you'll be able to find that. Right now, because of all of the stuff that's been going on since the 7th, I've been running a 50% off a coupon for that just so that people can get out and get into it and see it. So again, there's 10 prophecies documented on there. If you watch all of the entire course back to back, just watching the video, it's a little over 2 hours. So it's solid information, on-site teaching, and giving you practical evidence and showing you exactly how it's being fulfilled today in our time for the first time ever. And so you can find a lot of my other resources there as well. But the course is something that's really been coming alive, just helping believers really understand and see for themselves the things that are happening.
Yeah, it's interesting too because it's one of the things I appreciated about your books is having the side by side. I've done a lot of photography in Israel myself, not certainly to the level that you have, but I always found it fascinating to look at, prophetic scenarios, kind of like exactly what you did. But I think if I remember right, you had some of the earliest photography ever that's existed from just in any type of photography. Of course, people as photography began to be established, a lot of people went to the land of Israel. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's one of the really amazing sort of backstories in terms of documenting the things that are happening. The modern cutting edge technology of photography begins sort of in the 1840s, and by 1843, 1842, you're in that area. There's these adventure photographers that are just traveling and capturing as much as they can. And some of the first photography ever of Jerusalem was captured in 1844. And there's a particular French photographer that set up his, I'm sure what was just trunks and trunks of big, clunky, heavy gear, and found a rock outcropping that overlooks the old city of Jerusalem, which is near today's Hebrew University. And so with my second photo book, Jerusalem Rising, we actually found that exact rock outcropping where that photo was taken from, and we took the exact same shot from the exact same angle. And as far as photography goes in general, there might be something different, but as far as I know, it's some of the photography we did recreating those photos from 1844 is the first time that a lot of those photos have ever been recreated, as well as potentially the longest period of time between an old photo and a new photo, which spanned about 175 years. And so what's fascinating to me about that is that in 1844, a complete world away, there's an Ottoman Sultan who's beginning to revitalize or try to revitalize the Ottoman Empire. And so he orders a census through all of the Ottoman Empire, which at the time includes this dirty little back town of Jerusalem. And it's most likely, as far as I know, it's the first modern census of Jerusalem since biblical times. And so in 1844, from the Ottoman census records, we know that there's 15,000 people in Jerusalem, and the majority of them, over 7,000 of them, are Jewish. And that is the exact same year as this photographer. Again, I'm sure these men never knew each other, complete worlds away. But on the exact same year in 1844, we have the very first photography of Jerusalem. In the exact same year, we have Ottoman census records telling us that when we look at that photo from 1844, there is only 15,000 people living there. And what's amazing with that side by side shot now is that in Jerusalem right now is, I think it's well over a million with all of the, the suburbs and things growing. So again, when Ezekiel and some of these other prophets talk about that God will bring his people back to the land and he will multiply his people on the land, from 1844 to today, what, 180 years, going from 15,000 to well over a million. I mean, that's multiplication several times over for sure. And so, again, we're able to factually and visually document uh, the prophetic words of the prophets coming to pass in our day in a way that we never could before.
Yeah, I find it fascinating too that, there's a lot of revisionism in the sense of Israel history or the land of Israel history, no doubt. And as we know, there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world. And so when you look at some of the more either governments or Europe, whatever, it doesn't matter, or even some of the legacy media, if you want to say it that way, oftentimes they are very short on fact. Their journalistic efforts are lacking, no doubt. And so they come up with some of these ideas that Israel has never been there or they haven't been there, but yet here you have documented evidence showing that, I mean, 50% or at least or so, right around there, of the people living in Jerusalem were Jewish. I mean, that was prior to any of the massive, waves of migration that came later. That was certainly prior to Zionism and, Herzl in 1897. So, maybe comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's one of the amazing things. Like if you are in a fitness program or you're in a business and you're looking to, to measure your growth, you'll always start with a baseline. What are we starting with? And so in a way, to me, I see that photo and some of the photography in 1844 as being that baseline. God is giving us a visual. God is giving us straight statistics from a Muslim Ottoman empire, saying this is the amount of numbers. And you're exactly right. From 1844, then starting in the 1880s is when the first wave of Jewish immigration begins. And at that point, the census numbers or the population in Jerusalem and all over the land slowly begins to increase. And again, that's even before World War I. That's even during the Ottoman rule. It's before the British move in, and try to take control of the mess that was created after World War I, and certainly long before 1948 when Israel was a nation. And so, it's like God giving us this historical baseline before He's about to begin the growth, so we can look back and go, that definitely is multiplication. Look what has happened. This is what the city used to look like. Now look at it. And, and for me, even some of the photography we did in Israel Rising, which was mostly shot in 2016, almost 10 years ago. A lot of the new photography in that book, for me, now looks old because of how much has changed and how much has grown in the last 10 years. And so just that aspect of just ongoing growth, ongoing restoration, it's exactly as the prophet said. And again, we're at a time in history with technology where we can document that, not as opinion or allegory or spiritual parallels or whatever, fact, visuals, proof. And that's what I love about not only the opportunity of the things I'm able to do with the video series and the photo books, but as a way to share with people, like God is keeping His promises and doing exactly what He said here. It's like, it's almost as if the prophets meant exactly what they said and said exactly what they meant. Like there's no mystery.
Yeah, how novel is that? That when God speaks, that He really means it in a very normal, literal
Right,
way. It,
right,
it
right.
also gives, it's just more testimony as well to, you know, i- if you think about Israel coming into the land, roughly 1400 BC, under Joshua. So, 3,400 years of presence being in the land. Again, even though most of the Jews were exiled, we know in Luke 21, Jesus said that 70 AD and Bar Kokhba revolt 135. Nevertheless, I mean, I remember in college, my I was a Jewish studies major, so we studied Jewish history and stuff like that all through there. but there's always been a Jewish presence in the land. No doubt they lost authority in the sense of control as a governing authority, but there's always been a presence there for 3,400 years. And so to have, like you said, it documented by the Ottomans, and again, they didn't really care so much about, as you said, it's a backwater.
Yeah, not at all. In fact, most historians agree that it's during the 400 years of Ottoman rule that the land suffers its greatest desolation. And that they had this crazy this crazy law where that they would tax the population based on the amount of trees that you have on your land. So if you don't want to pay taxes, man, what do? I mean, you're cutting down the trees. It completely decimates the region. The topsoil's washed away. The weather patterns change. Animal populations move out, and that's some of what we were able to capture and document in these two photo books. Here are these old photos showing how empty and desolate the land really is, and how much has changed under Israeli sovereignty. And again, not as a point of making the focus about the pictures, but the focus is on the promise. There's a lot of places, as you well know, like New York City, Tokyo. There's a lot of places that look better today than they did 100 years ago. But there's no other city or nation on earth that had this entire process prophesied and foretold to us of the destruction of the land, the scattering of the people, and then God bringing his people back to restore the land, rebuild their ancient cities, and reestablish national sovereignty. It's never happened before in human history, and no ancient people group has any type of ancient writings foretelling anything that's even relatively close. And so when we're talking about prophecy, it's not just a spiritual thing. It's while there certainly is an understanding of God reviving things and bringing restoration and resurrection really into dead bones, as Ezekiel talks about. He is talking about very practical and very tangible things that he's going to do, like Ezekiel says, in front of the nations. The nations are going to see this happening. And I'm pretty sure that the nations have taken notice here in the last 77, 78 years of Israel being reestablished.
Yeah, there's no doubt too that when you look at, I find it fascinating when if you take a satellite image of, let's say, Eilat, and you look at all that Israel has done down there, right at the southern tip, and then you just look on either side of the border. It's amazing that what Israel has done in their section, this little triangle, and
That's
then
right.
what the other countries haven't. I mean, it's desert, and it's green in Israel, but it's desert around it.
Yeah, and I talk about that when with my groups when we're in Israel. There's some favorite places I like to take up into the Golan Heights where, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with them as well. There's farms and orchards that go right up to the fence of communities and life and prosperity. And then on the other side of the fence in Syria or Lebanon, it's some scrub brush and some smaller towns, and there's nothing that would suggest the difference. In other words, it's the same rain and sunshine and the same soil. The only thing that's different is a fence and a covenant, and the sovereignty of Israel, and God just simply saying, when the people return, the land will physically respond. And that's becoming very apparent even right now on to so much so to a visual aspect. And to your point, I mean, you can look at satellite images without any lines or national boundaries, and you can almost tell where the boundaries of Israel are based on what's green and what is not. And so oftentimes when I take groups into Jordan and we go to Petra or to Wadi Rum or Amman or somewhere like that for some biblical sites there, I very quietly have the conversation with my group is saying, what Jordan looks like now is what Israel used to look like prior to 1948. Is that, and truthfully, according to Genesis 15 and Genesis 17, what is present day Jordan is actually all part of the promised land.
Mhm.
The only difference is, again, we're not talking about an anti-Arab thing or an Arab curse or anything like that. We're talking about the land physically responding to its rightful owners chosen by the God of Genesis 1. And that's some of what we're seeing within Israel, especially in terms of agriculture and the wine and the vineyards and just life beginning to spring up among the people and all over the land.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier, And as you were talking about things changing so fast, even, like you said, you did photographs, almost 10 years ago. What's planned for the upcoming book, the next book?
Well, I had an opportunity to sit down with some pioneers of the state of Israel, and of those that had moved to the land in the late 1930s up until the 1960s and 70s to document some of their journey. So it's still about prophecy fulfilled. One of the most repeated promise in our scriptures is that God will bring His people back to the land. And again, given the opportunity of the still young nation that we have here of Israel, many of those pioneers, none of them are famous, none of them are people that you would recognize, but they are just some of the most incredible, overcoming human interest stories that you could possibly find. And they are the very ones, or one of the many, who are literally walking in the fulfillment of all of these biblical promises. I will bring you back. I will gather you from the nations. I will gather you from the land of the north. I will bring you back from the north and the south and the east and the west, back to the land that I promised your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And these are the descendants who are literally walking in those things, whether they recognize it or not. So I had an opportunity to sit down and interview many of them and capture their stories. And for me, I'm sure you and I will be talking about this in the next year, because that manuscript is finished. All the photography is done. It's in the design stage right now. But for me, it's probably, of anything that I've done in terms of documenting prophecy being fulfilled. It's one thing to get photos of then and now places that's stunning and stirs your heart. To actually talk to real live people about their experience and how their journey, I, you know, I didn't have words. Like, even I'm trying to talk now, like I didn't have words to describe like what was going on in my heart as I'm listening to these pioneers talk about where they left and where they came from and what they found in this desolate land. And so for me, it's been probably one of the most life-changing and heart-rending projects that I've ever worked on within this series. And so I'll be talking much more about that in next year in 2026. But that's definitely in the works. I'm looking forward to sharing that.
Yeah, that's so awesome because I know, I mean, your your books, and I encourage people, you can get them at prophecywatchers.com. It's not just the pictures that are there, which again are phenomenal. If people like visuals, no doubt, and I think when you have them side by side like that, the same angle, the same exact spot, if you can, as much as you can, showing scripture come to life. But it's not just the pictures, but you also tell a story. You tell the story in there, and you have, it's not, I guess, it's not just a book of pictures. You have documentation, and you have obviously a manuscript that you've written along to go along with each of the pictures, which again I find phenomenal.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's, like I just said earlier, it's really not about the pictures, it's the promise. There's a lot of places that look better 50 or 100 years ago, but the fact that the prophets talked about this very thing and described specific details of how it would happen and when it would happen and what it would look like. They described this stuff 2,600 years ago, and in the photo books I have a lot of the historical timelines showing that nothing like this has happened before. In fact, that was some of my first thoughts as I started personally digging into it, going, surely this had been fulfilled somewhere, sometime before. Certainly that this land hasn't been, like this for, 17, 1800 years, like we've talked about. But, there are things that are being unfolded in the scriptures that are demonstrating, again, not just incredible photos, but showing that God is perhaps demonstrating one of the greatest acts of faithfulness that we've seen in literally thousands of years. He is keeping his word down to the T. And as we know from October 7th and other things have been going on lately, there is a very real enemy who prior to 1948 didn't care. Suddenly everybody cares. And there's a very real enemy who is beginning to fight and do anything they possibly can to stop it. But ultimately, when I talk to large groups about this, while we're documenting Israel, while we're looking at the fulfillments, ultimately this isn't about Israel so much as it is about the one who chose it.
Yeah.
If God is sovereign, doesn't He have the right to choose any particular people group and put them on any piece of land for any length of time that He chooses? Without my opinion, like without what if it's my opinion, then clearly, he's not God. He is going to do what he's going to do for the purpose of demonstrating his character to the world. And that's what the scriptures talk about. And so while Israel is a primary player, ultimately it comes back to God's decisions. And that is clearly what the enemy hates from to begin with. And right now that's primarily focused on Israel.
Yeah, it just reminds you of the, of Psalm 2 where the nations why do the nations rage and plot a vain thing? The one in heaven laughs because, God doesn't defer to the UN, or their legal wranglings or their opinions. Again, he gave this land to a guy named Abraham and his descendants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now, granted, if God wants to remove Israel from the land, which he's done a couple times, that's his prerogative, and that's his relationship with Israel. But it's another thing for the world to get together and conspire about this property where, this is God's land. I mean, it's not even really Israel's land. It's God's land that
Yep.
he has given, use to this Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's descendants. And so to watch this all unfold is really kind of fascinating. It's also, I think, interesting too that when you go at Armageddon, when Jesus returns, um, Joel chapter 3 tells us that God is gonna be determining a lot of his judgment based on those that sought to divide the land. I find that fascinating.
100%. And that's something that I have conversations with believers today about, is that especially those that are being caught up in the weeds and the mud of some of the stuff on the news and what's happening in Gaza, and is there starvation, is there famine, and is there this and is there that, is that ultimately, we're focusing on the wrong places. We need to be refocusing on the fact that God has made a covenant. God is bringing his people back. And sometimes people will say to me, well, I could support Israel if they were all Christians, or if they, did this, or if they did that, or, whatever their moral standard is. And I'll say, it's a very noble assumption. It's just opposite of what the prophet said. He said he would bring them all back to the land, and then he would pour out a cleansing, and then he would sprinkle clean water. And then he is the one and then he'll cause them to look upon the only one, or the one that they've pierced, and mourn for him like an only son. Like just the fact that God is gathering a bunch of secular Israelis together that need a cleansing. That's exactly what the prophet said. And we need to recognize that how we view the Jewish people, exactly what you said, we are going to be judged. The nations are going to be judged based on the people and on the land and how we respond and interact. And I've been encouraging people, listen, there's so much deception, there is so much fake news. You need to recognize that regardless of what's out there, God has made promises and God has made covenants. And even when we don't completely understand it, we need to do our best to realign our hearts with God's covenants and God's ways and his promises. Because just because there's things happening in the news that you might not understand does not change the fact that he's told us all of this stuff ahead of time. He's written all of this stuff down. There's a plan. And again, part of the conversation we're having about documenting and keeping track of what God has been doing, and historically, factually, visually, if these things are happening exactly as the prophet said, then all of the parts that haven't happened yet that the prophets talked about, like a king arriving on the Mount of Olives to defend his people and to enter Jerusalem and to establish justice and peace in the earth, perhaps that's going to happen as tangibly and as practically as all of these other words has been happening. And that's something that you would want to think about in terms of watching what CNN says or MSNBC says about what's happening in Gaza from reporters who don't even know the land or have even been there. And so, that is the primary issue right now. I think for believers is, can you focus on the word of God? Can you focus on the promises, even when the world is telling you something completely different?
Yeah, I've been talking a lot about this just in my own presentations because there is so much confusion right now, again, with the media. And as you said, it's, people send things and as we know that they'll send a thing of there's maybe a child that is, skin and bones, and then later comes out, well, the child is they cut out the brother, the older brother that's sitting there fully fed, but this child has a specific disease of some kind, and so it's much of it is propaganda, no doubt,
For
um,
sure.
foisted on there, and so people need to do their homework. At the end of the day, what I remind people of is that you said it perfectly, and this is what I've been sharing is that this is like reading. It's like reading that we're living in Bible times in the sense that if you just pick up your Bible and you read the Old Testament, let's say you happen to read the book of Judges, you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna read the book of Judges. It's about God's people. They're in the land." Um, there is no king in Israel in those days, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. I said, "You read the book of Judges, and you're like, man, this is like awful in the sense of
Yeah.
how the people were living. They're cutting up women and concubines, and but it's but what I remind people is they the key is God's promise. God didn't abandon his people in the book of Judges. They were still his people. Now, granted, they needed to be corrected, but that was God's prerogative. But no matter how they acted, they still didn't lose the promises that God made to them. And so when you look today at Israel, and of course, every country you can find something wrong with it, United States included, for
For
sure.
sure.
And so Israel's no different. But when you look at Israel, don't just focus on the what you see as failures, but to me, put it in biblical context. Focus on the promises. Regardless of what people say, God still made promises to this group of people, the ones that are Jesus's brothers physically and literally. And so we recognize this and go, hey, let's keep focused on it. Before we go here, the you we talked a little bit earlier about the work that you're doing there, after October 7th. And so talk about a little bit, maybe give an invitation to those that might want to join what you have upcoming.
Yeah, I don't want to comment just super quick on your last comment. It's ironic
Sure.
that you mentioned the book of Judges. I just returned from Israel about 4 or 5 weeks ago, where I was there for several weeks working with the harvest teams, and I have a good friend who's a lieutenant colonel in the IDF, and he was able to take me to some of the blast sites where some of the ballistic missiles had landed. And anyhow, at one point in the conversation, he's a secular guy, and he turned to me and he says, "You know what?" He said, I'm admittedly not a religious guy, but there's been so many things that in these wars that I just cannot explain." And he says, "You know what? I think we're in the book of Judges." That's what he says to me. He said, "I think that we're in the book of Judges for the same reason you said. Everybody's doing what they want in their own eyes." And he said, "In the book of Judges, it's like we fall away from, we start doing whatever we want, and then our enemies overrun us, and then we rally together as a people, and God gives us victory, and it kind of, gets us back online." So I just think we're in the book of Judges. It's funny that you say that, because again, secular military leaders, both in the reserve and and just throughout the nation, I've heard that comment 2 or 3 different times from independent
Mhm.
sources. We're in that time. And so God is using the covenants and the scriptures and the promises, even for secular men and women. In fact, in 2024, the most searched internet topic in Israel was the book of Psalms.
Was it?
And so, of all of the things that are going on, Psalm 121 has been a primary psalm that has been sought out like literally hours before missile attacks. So, where does my help come from? My help comes from the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He's not falling asleep. He's not, just tracking on all of this. Secular Israelis are turning their hearts back to the scriptures, whether they recognize the real root of it or not. Like, that awakening is happening. So I wanted to say that, initially. But in terms of upcoming groups and some of what we're doing with Ezra Adventures, if you are interested in joining a small group of 8 to 10, 8 to 12 people that want to get your hands involved with what's going on, we're, like I said, interacting with local farmers. This is not a tour with a couple projects. This is something coming to help and coming to work alongside families and communities still suffering under the weight of October 7th, and a nation who's still dealing with the largest reserve call up in Israel's modern history, of over 450,000 reservists called up. If you can imagine the amount of holes in businesses, in communities, in employees, and having employers, and businesses have closed, businesses have failed, restaurants are shortening their hours. All of this simply because of the war. And so if you want to come get involved in a very practical way of harvesting cherries or raspberries or working with irrigation lines or really just supporting whatever the farmers need, that's what we've been doing since October 7th. You can find out more information about that at EzraAdventures.com. I have an upcoming group for October 8th to the 17th that I still have some spaces available. So if you're seeing this and immediately want to jump on, you can contact us for more information on that. But we have groups that are going year round. If I had a group for every week of the year, I would just be staying in Israel, working with farmers and plugging in. There's so much to do. Again, the harvest is so plentiful and the workers are few. And Israel is feeling alone. They feel isolated. They feel like the world hates us or hates Israel. And our groups have an opportunity to come and to show them, even just by showing up, we love you. We are here to support you. How can we help? And just that act alone is far more valuable than even picking cherries or working in the vineyards or whatever the projects are. And so it's the relational connections. It's the heart connections with the land, the heart connections with the people, knowing that, like we've been saying, this entire story is going somewhere. God is not just simply restoring the nation and rebuilding Jerusalem and cleaning up the land for fun. This whole story is leading to the arrival of a king. And that's what you and I are both looking for. Everyone's looking for that.
Absolutely.
And if there's ever been a time when the righteous root of David would be welcomed on that throne to rule Israel, that time is coming very, very quickly.
Yeah, amen to that. And, people always ask, we have a trip planned for May of 2026, just a tour, but the people always ask about the safety. And so, for those that they want to come help, but they're worried. I mean, obviously you're there, you're still alive. I mean,
Sure.
if you don't mind, talk about that just for a moment.
Yeah, not at all. It's, when I've led 6 groups last year in 2024 when there was Hamas rockets and Hezbollah rockets and some of the first Iranian missile attacks. I know this sounds strange to say, but in Israel, most of the nation, you would never know that there's a war going on. Clearly, there's some hot spots. Clearly, there's some things that are happening that that are the organization that I'm working with and partnering with. They have their contacts. They know what's going on. But I've led 6 different groups through a much more intense wartime with incoming rockets and the Iron Dome intercepting things. And, all of my groups went home saying they felt safe. They felt secure. They were so blessed to be there. I mean, you would know from taking groups. I mean, during this time, we've had opportunities to take groups to places like Capernaum, which is normally 15, 20 buses in the parking lot. Tour guides are everywhere. The place was empty, and I sat my group on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and we listened to the birds. I have never, for me, I've been doing this for years and years and years. I have never seen Israel so empty. It's sort of a blessing and yet a heartbreaking situation in that, clearly the tourism is suffering, but for those that are going now, we were the only boat for a sunset swim out on the Sea of Galilee one evening, and like to enjoy the solitude of the land and the place that is thriving with biblical life, both Old and New Covenant, is a really special time. I'm continuing to take groups. I'll continue to do that, in the foreseeable future. And like I said, I had groups in the land right up until the Iran war, and I never had a problem with safety and security, and I'm grateful for that and look forward to more.
Amen. Well, Doug, appreciate your time today. It's been good catching up and hearing all the things that God's doing. And, for those that, EzraAdventures.com, check it out. Again, I certainly encourage it. Doug's a great guy. He's been doing this a long time, and I appreciate him coming on. And as always, God has promises for Israel. And that's where we're watching unfold right before our eyes. We are living in biblical times, everybody. That's the exciting thing about what we do here at Prophecy Watchers. So thanks for listening today, and we will catch you next time.